Okay, so we had a little bit of a technical difficulty, but we're back.
Mhm. We
Where
are.
we left off, you were telling me about how one of the things you really look into and look for in a classroom is it feeling like a community, a family, and mutual respect. I was wondering, how can your students demonstrate to you aspects of responsibility, caring, and good citizenship?
Oh, many ways, especially at this age. Number one is, hands to ourselves, that's it. At this age, there's a lot of touching and, that kind of thing. Some of it can be innocent, but then there can be the boys who are a little pushy shovey. We talk about that a lot. And again, it's all about establishing those rules, those norms. Do we um how can we be respectful to everybody, and that includes students. So certainly they can demonstrate that by following the rules. um, and just a lot of times, you see in education, there's a lot of times that you see very small glimpses of really great things. So it's important to catch those and to recognize them, because the more you recognize it, the more the student will say, "Wow, she noticed that I said please or thank you or held the door or picked something up for a student." So they're more apt to do that. So I always try to catch those little incidental moments. And again, praise, for the kids, because they need that, they need praise. So a lot of time it'll be like, wow, I saw, today you guys really got in and you sat down and you followed the norms and we got our work done. So guess what? We have 5 minutes left. They love playing the bananagrams and,
Yeah.
those kinds of things. So it's rewarding them with what I still consider educational things, but they're fun. So it's to them, it's not learning, even though they still are.
Yeah.
So
Making learning play and vice
yeah.
versa.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so that actually transitions nicely. Again, you've been helping me a lot with these. Obviously, you're teaching kids, social cues and things like that at that age, but we're also teaching them subject matter.
Mhm.
How do you measure students' progress and success in terms of learning goals?
Um, because I work with students that have IEPs, I have very specific goals. Most of my students, about 90% of my students, have either math or reading goals, sometimes both. And I do have students that have social goals. So sometimes it's all on one IEP, but I do have students that just have social goals. So I take data. So at the beginning of the year, I on sheets. It's called Google Sheets. So it's kind of like Excel. I print out, what my students' goals are, and we take data. I don't like to take data every day because, that takes away from what I'm supposed to be doing. Like usually once a week, I try to, take the data. I do a lot of anecdotal notes and assessments, just I'm assessing all the time. But for me, it's very specific towards what the child is supposed to be working towards.
That makes sense. How do you adapt lessons for your students' needs, either during the original planning or on the fly as you realize something needs to be changed?
Like every good teacher, I sit down. Yesterday was my planning day. I planned for next week, but I also know, Sarah, that it isn't what it is. It's great to have plans. It really
Yeah.
is, because it keeps you focused. Um, but they just don't work. So I'm constantly an on the fly teacher, but more than just an on the fly teacher, I am a reflective teacher. So I spend many afternoons, evenings, sleepless nights thinking about everything that I feel didn't go right and how to turn that around and make it better the next time. So for me, I'm really a reflective teacher. So I'm constantly reflecting back and saying, okay, that didn't go well. What could I change? And how could I make it better? And because I do K1 and 2, of course, I have three different age groups. I take them
Yeah.
separately, but I also have to keep in mind what their goals are. So, for instance, I think, 7 or 8 second grade students. I have them in two groups, but even in those two groups, they're at various levels. So my lesson plans, because I only have 45 minutes with this group, so I need to make sure in that 45 minutes that I'm covering the phonics piece for, student A, and then I'm covering the, you know, trying to increase reading level for student B, student C, it could be comprehension. So you have to make sure that you're weaving all of those pieces into that 45 minutes.
That's an awful lot to juggle. Yeah,
It is, but I love it. So, I've
yeah.
always been able, even when I was a para, the teacher that I work for had said to me, you have a knack for knowing what students need. So I've always been able to get from a student from point A to point B.
Oh,
Somehow it just always works out that way. I don't know how, but
that is
so.
fantastic. Knowing that you said lesson plans change, still, what is your favorite lesson plan that you've ever created? Or maybe
Oh,
what is the favorite lesson that you gave? It might have been something that changed in the moment.
I love science. I just love science. And when I was teaching the STEPS program, I was teaching all content areas. So I loved the sciences, just getting in there and the science experiments, and really, I like to blow stuff up. I won't lie to you. I taking the kids outside and giving them, the bottles of Coke and the Mentos, and what do you think's
Yeah,
going to happen? And so really that was really what I love. And I do miss that about my current job. But um I just yesterday, I'm like, ooh, I found some books on pumpkins, and then I'm like, oh, okay, so we're gonna, that's the reading, the language, the comprehension. I'm gonna get a class pumpkin, and we're gonna get in there, and we're gonna pull out the seeds. That's the sensory piece, and then we're all gonna be working together. So that is the social piece, and oh, then we're going to make our own books. We're going to write. Then there would be the because we're having problems with nouns and verbs and all that. So when the kids are taking up the stuff, we're going to be talking about it and classifying, our words into nouns, verbs, adverbs, those kinds of things. Then I'm going to
oh,
have them have little pumpkins, which they'll decorate, which will be the final step. But in between that, we're going to they'll make their own books. So that's the month of October. So I
that's so
really love
exciting.
to be able to, I'm like, wait a minute, I can still do those things, even though I'm teaching reading. I can bring all of those elements into reading, because we started reading a book, so we started with the reading, but I'm going to be able to bring, the phonological awareness and the comprehension and the fluency and all of that, and the science and the writing of writing a book, put that all together in one neat package. I'll let you know how it all works out.
I do want to hear about how that all turns out.
Yeah, I'm excited.
I would have loved that as a
Yeah,
child. Who doesn't
yeah,
love
yeah.
messing around with a
Right,
pumpkin?
right,
The
exactly.
quintessential fall activity.
And they're all boys. So my hope is that they'll be really in there, because I've had some girls with that, like, I'm not touching. I'm like, yes, you are. Get your hand in there. Just do one, because it goes back to, well, I can't force it. But oh, you can just go in and just take one seed. That's the accommodation piece. If you have
Mm-hmm.
somebody who doesn't, because perhaps they have a sensory issue,
Yeah,
I'd give them the glove, a glove, and then I'd say, okay, just go in and take one. Then all of a sudden they love it. And now, so we're building upon that. So
that's good. It's good to surprise the students with things like that,
yeah.
but I bet they also surprise you.
Oh, they sure do.
What
They
is the
do.
most surprising way a student has demonstrated their understanding to you?
Um, oh, I have so many things that I could say about that. And I'll start off earlier in my teaching career. And I forget, it wasn't preschool. I think it was when I started teaching the STEPS program, and I was teaching kindergarten at that point. I literally could see the wheels of a child's brain working. I mean, you know what I mean,
Yeah,
I really felt like all of a sudden it clicked for that child, and that was amazing. Um, so those types of things have been amazing, just progress in general. But this year, I have a student who's dyslexic, and he's obviously been a struggling reader. So last year when I started with him, he knew, I think, 3 letters of the alphabet and no sight words, no kindergarten sight words, and he was in first
Wow.
grade. He could not automatically recite those sight words. The end of the year, he was knew kindergarten first and was into some of the second grade, knew all of the letters and was reading. It started at a double A, which is really not reading, and he ended at like an E. This year, at the beginning of the year, when I tested him, he had not lost anything. And
That's amazing.
especially for a child who's dyslexic, that was like amazing. I cried. I he was amazing. He did go to summer school, so to me that proves that summer school and that, keeping him going really works. Um, but I was just amazed because I really was dreading the thought that everything that he had worked so hard for was going to be lost, but he didn't, so that was amazing.
That's so cool. So I understand that since you're often working with IEPs and things like that, your answer to the next question might be fairly direct.
Mhm.
Um, how do you decide a student has reached a learning objective and is ready to move on to the next step?
For me, it is a data driven, so I have to take that data to make sure that they've reached that goal, and we have criteria within our objective. So it could be something like, Jane will, recite the alphabet, correctly, 6 out of 8 times or whatever it is. So once that child has reached that, um, with the criteria met of 6 out of 8 times, whatever, you still want to go back and make sure after a period of time that that is still the child has still retained that information. Typically, IEPs go for a year, so a child has a year to gain the knowledge or to overcome the objectives. But there have been times where children have not met the objectives. So in that case, you would start the new IEP with that same objective, hopefully changing it a little bit. Um, but then once you do have a child, everything, especially with reading and math, is so kind of systematic. So if I have a kindergarten student who starts off with, has to learn the letters and the sounds of the alphabet, write their name and things like that. Once they mastered that, then you kind of go on to the next level. So then it would be, sight words and being able to segment and blend words. Then it would go on to reading, comprehension and fluency are really kind of your higher level, your later um, pieces that you'd want them to get. So everything is really kind of systematic. And even with math, you have to start off with your number sense. If they don't have number sense, you can't ask them to add. So you have to
Yeah.
start really with those basics, and you have to make sure that they have the foundation. As I keep saying, you can't build a house with a crappy foundation because it's going to fall down. So it's the same with education. They have to have that foundation, that really solid foundation for everything before you can go forward.
Okay. So you've already mentioned that you are a reflective teacher, which I actually have a direct question about.
Mhm.
Are there any moments in your teaching career that have caused you to reflect and change your methods or approach?
Oh God, daily almost. And again, they're not big moments. They really aren't. A lot of them are very small. Because as a teacher, you think, oh my God, this is going to be so great. The kids are going to take to this, and it just doesn't happen. And that could be for a variety of reasons. The kids were tired. It was over their head, under them. Um, Something's going on at home. There's a lot of components to everything clicking, and there are just days that it just doesn't click, and it's not my fault nor theirs. It just doesn't happen. um but I always try, and sometimes I have to remember to be very concise, and with certain students you can't really joke around, so you kind of have to, again, going back to knowing your students, you have to really know what's going on. And making small changes can be really important. So it's not the big picture. Sometimes it really is the smaller pieces. For instance, if I'm doing a phonological awareness, drill of some sort, doing, do I need to test if I know they know the 26 letters? Do I need to test them all on all 26 every day? No, that's too long. So I really should put that down to maybe 5 a day, those kinds of things. It's tweaks almost.
Interesting. Right. So, kind of in line with that, moving away from talking about the strictly subject matter educational side of things, kind of want to talk a little bit about a teacher's role in the community.
Mhm,
Um,
mhm.
o- Not only the goals you set for yourself, but how you work with others. So, to start off, did you have certain goals in mind for your teaching career, and how might those goals have changed over time?
You're going to laugh because when I became a teacher, um, again, really not knowing what I was getting myself into. Again, not a bad thing, but my original goal was to become a teacher and then become superintendent because I'm kind of I'm all in kind of person.
Oh,
I
you are.
don't take things small. I kind of, take the bull by the horn. Um, and my reason for wanting to do that was not for the position or anything else. It was simply to be able to help the students. I have had various jobs within the school district. When my kids were small, I started off in the cafeteria, and that's really what led me to teaching. And I loved that job because, yeah, I was a lunch lady, but I knew what every kid liked. I knew my kids that came in that liked the ends of the pizza. So y- in my opinion, every job within a school is just equally as important. It doesn't really matter what you're doing because you are forming that community. Um, so I just my initial thought was, yeah, I'm gonna get in there, I'm gonna teach, and then I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do this, and then I'm gonna, be a superintendent. Now, no way. There's no way I'm going to. No. So my goal now is to live out my rest of my happy years doing what I'm doing now. So, but I'm involved. I mean, I was on the PTO as like the teacher rep for many years. I'm a mentor coordinator. So, in other words, when we have new teachers come in, I am the coordinator of the program. So, I help new teachers. I'm friends with people I work with, past, present, um, that kind of thing. So, and as far as the community, yeah, I'm always looking for ways to bring new things into the school. So I've kind of always just kind of done that.
Yeah. So, two questions about community. One that's like the microcosm of the classroom itself, and the other one being, like the town or the district. So, question one, can you tell me about a student you had difficulty connecting with due to behavior or anything else, and how you tried to resolve the situation?
There's been a couple that in the beginning, and I'm going to be honest with you, it probably was due to behaviors. Um because behaviors can really take a toll on you personally and mentally. Because you kind of think, what am I doing wrong here? Um so there have been some students where in the very beginning you're almost like, I don't even really like this kid, and which is awful to say, but it's, I
Children
mean,
are people too.
right. And I would never let the child know that or see that. But it's funny, it's those students in the very beginning that you end up absolutely loving in the end. So you just kind of got to work through it. There are days where, you're like, my God, why can't I just get him to understand? A lot of them were boys too, by the way. Most of them, all of them, actually, all of them. Um, but it's kind of breaking through that barrier, and you have to have, because you're right, we are all human beings. I mean, we all have our own emotions and things like that, and we all have our personalities, and there's going to come a point in time where a teacher and a student, they just don't mesh. I mean, it just is what it is, and it's really nobody's fault unless you're kind of a yucky person as a teacher. I mean, you have to have a general likeness to be doing, and a passion. Being a teacher is a passion. It comes from within, and if you don't have that passion, you can't do it. So you have to overcome those, when you realize, oh, I'm not sure that I'm going to mesh with this person. You have to find, because every single child can learn. I adamantly believe that every child can learn. They learn differently. It's my job to find out how to make them learn. And in line with that, you're not going to, every personality, you're not going to be like, wow, I just love them. But again, it's my job to find that piece that I do love and pull that out. And then, as I said, in the end, they're the ones that you want to take home at the end of the summer or the end of the
Yeah,
June. So I don't know if that answers that, but
it totally does. Question two, you said that a teacher needs passion. What is a cause tied to education or your community that you feel strongly about?
oh, um in the past, was always Townsend Recreation. Both I was a recreation commissioner for many years, and that was a passion of mine because I really do feel, coming from a small community, that children needed something to do. I come from a community that is very small, and there's not a lot of things for kids to do, so that was always a passion of mine. Um, to be honest with you now, I'm a little bit older, and my husband and I, both our children are gone. So really now it's more taking a little bit more time for me and for us versus, we're always still out doing things, but I'm not involved with something currently with the community.
I also, am I remembering correctly that when you were working at Ashby Elementary, you did some sort of like school box lunch
Yep.
programs for
Yep.
students
Yep.
who
No, we did the
weren't
backpack
necessarily food
program.
secure?
Yeah. Yep, we did. We were collecting food. We did backpack. So what we did is we had children who may not have had food over the weekend. What we did is on Fridays we filled a backpack full of food for them to eat over the weekend, and then they'd bring the backpack back on Monday, and we'd save it for Friday. So that was a great program. So
Yeah, because food insecurity it has such a horrible impact on not just education, but every aspect of a
oh,
child's life. Um,
absolutely.
and I know that a lot of the teachers at Ashby Elementary work together on that, but I remember you having a very prominent role in
Yeah,
it.
yeah, that was a while ago. I'd forgotten about that. Yeah,
um,
yeah.
yeah. So I know you worked with other teachers during that. When you are collaborating with other teachers, how do you decide when to lead and when to step back and let someone else drive the discussion?
That can be difficult for me because I am kind of, and I don't mean to be, I just kind of look at something and see what needs to be done. And
You're a go-getter.
I am a go-getter, and I don't mean to like take over things, but sometimes I probably do, and I probably come off as whatever, but that's not my intention. Um, I've gotten better with that with age. Because I am kind of slowing down, if you will, try again, taking time out for me, which is
Yeah.
so important as a teacher. So you have to remember that. Um, I am trying really hard now to say no to some of the things that come up and to let other people kind of take over things. So it's kind of a balancing act. When I see an idea out there and somebody, and I let it go, I kind of step back, see what's going to happen. And then if it doesn't take off, then I might jump in and take over. But I'm now trying to let that happen a little bit more. It's not easy, but it does happen, where people do take over.
I think that also answers my next question. You're very good at preempting these, but I'll let you decide if there's anything more you want to add to it or if it's the idea of kind of sharing the leadership position that you want to go with. Is there any aspect of education or teaching that you're currently working on improving in yourself?
Oh, every day. Every day. I did just take an OG Orton Gillingham class over the summer. So I am now a trained OG person. Um,
Congratulations.
Thank you. OG is such an amazing program. And that is one of those things where I took the 30-hour class right before school started. Works really well with dyslexic children. I have several dyslexic children. So that is something that I'm really, really trying to work with. And my partner at Ashby Elementary, the special ed teacher who does third and fourth grade, she's OG trained, or OG certified. I would be OG trained.
Gotcha.
So I'm constant, her and I kind of are really working together. I'm always kind of bouncing ideas off of her and things like that. So that's something that I just learned that I'm so excited about to really share with my students.
That's cool. Who do you seek out when you are confused or need support?
In my current role, I would have to say it would be my Kelly McNabb, the other special ed teacher
Oh,
that, because we really do, because we do the same job, so, her students are third and fourth grade, so we're the only two special education teachers within the building. So if it's procedural and to do with special ed, I definitely would go to Kelly. Now, if I had a problem with a student, a gen ed, a student in a gen ed teacher's classroom, then I would go to that teacher. And basically, really, those are the only two, because again, small school,
your
very small
closest
staff.
peers.
Yeah, yeah, there's not a lot of, that kind of stuff. So we're lucky that way.
Right. So, one more of these kind of broad community teacher improvement questions, and then one final one to wrap everything up, which isn't really a wrap up question, is instead oddly specific for the last one.
Okay.
But first off, what is the best, most necessary feedback you've ever received, either positive or negative?
Oh,
It's a tough one.
it is a tough one because, I'm trying to think of something specific. Um, I think that I have gotten some good feedback, and that's always kind of good for your soul and for, teaching. But I think constructive criticism or constructive feedback is equally as important. Um, and I have gotten that. We do every year we have observations, and we have this system. It's called Teach Point. Um, and the principal is always really good about giving a comment, but she always gives you something to work on. And I've been doing this a while, and you sometimes you think, well, what could I possibly, I've been doing this for so long, but there's always something that you can work on, whether it's the speed that you're talking, whether it's, the size of your group, or it's classroom management, or, you're having a problem with a specific student, or, I read a book and the principal may have said something like, you should have gone over the vocabulary beforehand. Any of those kinds of things are really invaluable because a lot of times when you're preparing lessons and or teaching, you kind of get into a mode. You're kind of like that little engine, you're just kind of going and going and going,
Yeah.
hence the reflections. But you don't, you sometimes you miss steps, or you may, like I said, talk too fast, or, I may not have looked out and seen a student who was looking at me like I had 12 heads. So it's kind of sometimes you have to kind of slow down and just kind of, really look around. Can you do that every single day, every single lesson? No, but I really try to force myself to really slow down and make sure that what I'm doing is being absorbed by the students. Just last this week I teach in my math group, and these poor little students could not understand a missing, like if the question was, 15 plus question mark equals 30. And
Ah,
uh, which they're second grade. I mean, it just, no matter how I taught that subject, we would go through it, I would model it, they do it with me, and I'm like, great, they have it. I'd give them a problem, they'd come back, and what they were doing is they were adding the first number and the last number together and just putting that in the middle.
Oh no.
And I kind of, at one point, I was kind of getting a little frustrated. I won't lie to you, because I'm like, how can we're doing this and they're getting it when we're doing it, but they can't generalize it. So then I was like, well, you turkey bird, they're not getting it. They're getting it. They're smiling at me when I'm going through it, but they do not get it. So I just looked at them, and this poor little boy, like, just had almost tears in his eyes. And I just looked at him and I said, okay, we're done. We're going to put it away. I'm going to play a game, and I'm going to start this tomorrow. We're going to do something else. So I had to figure out, I'm like, they don't understand. And no matter, I've taught it 50 different ways and they don't get it. So it's things like that, yeah, again, really looking at being aware. It's really, teacher is really situational awareness as well. You have
Yeah.
to be aware that your students either understand it or they don't understand. They could be smiling, but they don't get it.
Yeah.
So you really have to kind of take that feedback too, because that is feedback,
Yeah, it's not just feedback from
Mhm.
peers and supervisors, it's
Mhm.
feedback from the students themselves, even if they don't realize they're
Right,
giving you
right,
feedback.
right, exactly. Those little big eyes and those tears nearly broke my heart. So I'm like,
Oh,
okay, we're done with this, boy. We're throwing this away. We're gonna figure this out some other day. So
all right. And now my last question for you, just because this is something that is, so prevalent in kids' experience. Have you ever had to deal with an incident of bullying or antagonism in the classroom? And how did you handle it?
99% of my students are boys. So yes. Whether it was bullying in the sense of, somebody like seeking somebody out and really being mean to them, I've seen it in the schools, not particularly in my classroom, but I have seen it, unfortunately. Again, in my classroom, it's such a small school, so everybody knows everybody. And those boys, whether they're cousins or best friends or whatever, everybody's like brothers. So you do have a lot of that, kind of picking at each other. Um, but like I said, I haven't seen any real big bullying within Ashby Elementary, but I'm sure it has happened, but I haven't seen it.
Yeah.
Now, if I can just elaborate a little bit, I would not put up with it. You know, and even just a little nitpick and stuff. I raised two boys, so I know what that's all about. So, that you get rid of that right away. Um, but as far as bullying too, our district really does a lot with bullying.
Hmm.
And it just is something that I'm not going to let happen in my classroom. So if I saw it in that, I think it especially happens, I think maybe a little bit later in, like, maybe third and
Uh-huh.
fourth grade, they might see it a little bit more, where right now, again, my kids are still think everybody's wonderful.
Everybody's
um
their best friend. Why wouldn't they be?
right, exactly.
Yeah.
So it's hard. I mean,
Those divisions
that
kick in later.
right, exactly. And it is a hard thing because, I know it's there. I've seen it. My children, have had it, that kind of thing. And I think, and me thinking back to my own school years, they just didn't call it bullying back then. I've seen it. So, you see it in your adult life. So, um, that is society, but we'll save that for another discussion.
Yeah. And speaking of discussions, that's all of our questions.
All
I
right.
can't thank you enough for doing all of this.
All right.
And
My pleasure.
yeah, that's a wrap. Thank
All
you.
right. Well, it was great